Did you guys see this savage clapback Wendy's did on Twitter? I'm so following them. Jimmy's Seafood totally triggered those vegans on Twitter. Iconic. Burger King is so relatable on Twitter. I'm dead inside as well. Big mood. Within the last 2 years or so, we've seen an increasing trend towards a very interesting phenomenon. Namely, corporate Twitter accounts have begun to base their online presence less on professional promotions and more on being relatable over social media. We see accounts like Wendy's posting memes and sassy clapbacks, Arby's posting references to our favorite fandoms from Danganronpa to Game of Thrones to the Adventure Zone, and Burger King posting relatable memes about existential dread or using stan Twitter jargon. These accounts have become so popular that the Wendy's social media team actually did a Q&A on Reddit with over 42,000 upvotes and multiple instances of being gifted Reddit Gold, which gives you access to special features and costs real money. People were literally just giving their money to a mega corporation on Reddit for nothing in return because they loved Wendy's brand image that much. Given that this has been a growing trend for the past couple of years, there have accordingly been people criticizing this trend the whole time. With that said, popular criticism of this sort of corporate social media presence has only really recently started to take hold. We've seen tons of articles, both from clickbait sites and legitimate news sources, essentially praising the companies for their clever savagery. These articles mainly date from mid-2017 to early 2018, while more recent articles are increasingly critical of these companies' social media presence. Even still, the praise greatly outweighs the criticism, and every time one of these companies posts a savage tweet, BuzzFeed clones jump on it as if it's the year's hottest mixtape. So why is that? How did this trend of fast food companies getting into Twitter brawls with each other become so widespread? Why has mainstream criticism of it only sprung up very recently? And finally, is this cause for concern and why? Well, let's see. The trend of fast food companies specifically roasting one another is pretty recent, but the factors that set the stage for it are a few years older. One of the first big brands to really successfully harness social media to become somewhat of an icon wasn't actually on Twitter at all. More specifically, Denny's presence on Tumblr was one of the first times a fast food company's social media activity really blew up and became sort of a ubiquitous presence on a social media site. The blog was created in early 2013, and they quickly began posting surrealist memes in a similar style to a lot of the users at the time. Here are some examples. Things like deliberate misspelling of words to maintain a casual tone, existentialist memes, and directly engaging with other users were all things that were very popular with the average Tumblr user at the time. They even posted references to popular events. A lot of people remember the iconic failure of DashCon. Essentially, a few people tried to run a Tumblr-themed convention, and it was a poorly managed mess. Possibly the most famous picture of the convention was an empty room with a single ball pit, which was just a shallow blow-up kiddie pool with plastic balls in it. Denny's made several posts referencing the meme, calling it DenCon. These kinds of posts were initially met with a sort of bemused appreciation. Replies like, "What the fuck, Denny's?" or "Denny's, are you okay?" were some common responses to these memes. But after a while, the company's presence on Tumblr sort of just became accepted. Denny's was kinda just everyone's weird but funny cousin who occasionally shows up at family gatherings. You're not really sure why they're there, but you're not complaining either. Comments on memes posted by the account started to be less confused and more just, they're pretty good at this. Eventually, this phenomenon started to spread to other social media sites. Starting in 2015, Burger King, which at the time mostly posted generic social media promotions like, "Hey guys, Whoppers are 15% off," started to dabble in other content. This really kicked off when a tweet from 2015, which referenced the "What are those" meme, blew up and got 32,000 retweets. Compare that to this tweet from 2013, which is pretty much just your average run-of-the-mill advertising statement. Nowadays, their social media feed is pretty much all memes and pop culture references, and they've gained around 1.5 million followers since 2013. After Burger King's foray into the meme world, other companies started to follow, and most eventually settled into a comfortable niche. Arby's' Twitter is primarily centered around various pop culture references. For instance, they make fictional characters out of sandwich ingredients and recreate video game screens. Domino's and Pizza Hut capitalize off of their rivalry with one another. Wendy's Twitter is mainly based around being sassy and roasting their followers and other companies. For pretty much all of them, this strategy has been really effective. Since 2013, Arby's went from 98,000 followers to over 800,000, Domino's went from 160,000 followers to 1.2 million, and Wendy's went from around 161,000 followers to almost 2.5 million. But all things must come to an end, and in the case of fast food companies on social media, Denny's was the first to fall. Eventually, people started to become tired of Denny's capitalizing on every new meme, and people started to turn on them. This was in part because they found these attempts to be cringy and part of a growing news story about Denny's facing several racial discrimination lawsuits. In fact, in 2017, Tumblr users deliberately created a new meme dedicated to making fun of Denny's for the sole purpose of making it unparodyable by the company. Essentially, it was just the phrase, "John C. Miller, president and CEO of the Denny's Corporation, is a capitalist running dog and his wealth must be seized and redistributed to the people," pasted on various stock images and superimposed over other memes. According to the meme's creator, it was a lose-lose situation for Denny's. Either they had to silently watch people dunk on them on a site where they used to be loved, or if Denny's actually parodied the meme, the megacorporation would have gotten baited into distributing anti-capitalist propaganda. Denny's eventually did end up making a parody of the meme, which just made people like them less. But this only happened around a year ago, and Denny's enjoyed years of praise and free publicity before this happened. There also hasn't been any major backlash towards Wendy's or any other big fast food chain based on their social media presence. Besides a couple instances of companies tweeting and deleting tone-deaf content, they're still quite popular. This might initially seem a bit confusing, especially because pretty much everyone claims to hate ads. I have never met a single person whose favorite part of watching TV was the commercials. So why have these companies managed to do this for so long without experiencing mass criticism or unpopularity? So in order to understand what makes this form of advertising so effective, it's important to look at what they are actually trying to imprint into your mind. The goal of advertising nowadays isn't necessarily as simple as it used to be. When you watch vintage commercials, the message is generally pretty straightforward. It shows you a product, it tells you why the product is good, and then finally it tells you to use it. Take a look at the shampoo commercial from the 1950s.
When your hair looks radiantly alive, then you feel radiantly alive. Thanks to Prel, Liquid Prel, the extra rich shampoo.
The formula here is pretty straightforward. It shows you pretty hair, it tells you that Prel is better than other shampoos, and finally it tells you to use it. There's even a little jingle at the end to make it stick in your mind. And certainly, these kinds of advertisements do still exist, but a very common and arguably more effective form of advertising nowadays runs much deeper than that. And that is creating a strong brand image. It's not only about being immediately recognizable to a consumer base, but also having that consumer base associate clear, positive traits with your company, like cool or reliable. Think about the kind of commercials that play during, say, the Super Bowl. The main goal isn't that you come out of these commercials thinking that the product is amazing and you want to buy it. You want the ads themselves to be memorable, go viral even, and you want to make sure that they remain associated with the company in the process. Think of the famous Old Spice commercials starring Terry Crews. People don't like the commercials because they love shaving creams. People like the commercials because the commercials are entertaining. In effect, you want content that's enjoyable enough on its own that people share the advertisements with each other of their own volition. Effective ads these days are not boring videos that you zone out watching. It's content that makes you want more. And with the advent of millennials and Generation Z kids who grew up on social media, grew up with memes and internet culture as a part of their lives, starting to get jobs in marketing, companies are starting to get very, very good at this. As this applies to these corporations on Twitter, their job is to stand out. And it works. As these accounts get more and more popular, people begin to assign personalities to these corporations and even begin to view them as friends. Arby's is that cool nerdy kid who loves the same stuff you do. Burger King is your friend you make existential dread jokes with. With Wendy's, we even saw the popularity of a meme that personified the chain's mascot as a sassy, smug anime girl. In fact, Anime Wendy is so popular that when you search Wendy's on Google Images, one of the first results is the mascot reimagined as an anime girl. So rather than the intention being make you want a Wendy's burger right now, it's to make sure that when you do want a burger, the first thing that comes to mind is your cool, sassy friend Wendy, who, by the way, never uses frozen meat in her delicious Baconator. And certainly a lot of these images were probably made sarcastically. You know, it's funny and ironic that ubiquitous mascot you see on your drive out of town is 4chan's waifu now. Regardless, however, the actual impact ends up being the same. Wendy's, a mega corporation with thousands of employees and a CEO who makes millions of dollars a year, is viewed not as a massive, powerful entity, but as a singular, fun, relatable individual. She's ever present on social media, she's sassy sometimes, she loves memes, she's you. Another effect of this is when a company posts a cool, ironic meme in the same format as other internet users, it doesn't necessarily automatically read as an advertisement. Often, the only thing that delineates it as an ad is the brand name attached to it, and as long as that brand name sticks in our mind when we think of that ad, the positive association with the company stays there as well, but in a much more subtle way than what we're used to. Not only that, but the massive popularity of Wendy's and the amount of people who view the company as a friend has convinced people that making fun of these companies is uncool and that supporting them is cool. Regularly, when people attempt to criticize Wendy's over Twitter and Wendy's responds with a short zinger, the internet's on Wendy's side. Just take a look at some of the replies to an exchange where a user criticized Wendy's and got roasted.
Eating at Wendy's tomorrow. Game respects game.
Thank you for the clear reminder why everyone loves sassy redheads. See you for lunch tomorrow, milady.
He didn't say milady, but he said it spiritually, we all know this.
They're fucking his life up.
People need to stop thinking they can go toe-to-toe with Wendy's in a Twitter battle.
The point is, the trendy thing to do here, the thing that indicates that you appreciate the latest memes, is to support Wendy's, whereas making fun of Wendy's is uncool. People who do that are out of the loop, they don't get it. People are out here literally begging to be insulted by Wendy's, and they don't even get called cucks for it, which is how you know something is really epic. And yeah, maybe trying to get into a Twitter fight with a fast food company is pretty lame, but this also means that all criticisms of companies like Wendy's are deemed to be uncool and not worth listening to. Even communities that used to be actively dedicated to making fun of this kind of content began to grow to praise it. Take a look at the subreddit r/fellowkids, which has around 300,000 subscribers. The subreddit was founded in 2014 and used to be dedicated solely to making fun of companies that tried too hard to be relatable with their advertising content. But as companies started to get good at using Twitter, the subreddit's focus began to trend more towards allowing and posting self-aware content, with most of the comments actually praising the companies rather than laughing at them. This makes it harder to criticize these advertising practices and even to identify them. I mean, we all know consciously that the funny tweet that whatever company put out is an ad, but when you point this out, you're seen as the wet blanket ruining the fun. And while this isn't the kind of stuff that gets brought up over fights over the shape of your burgers, there are some serious problems to talk about. Generally speaking, I think it's fair to say that any cultural shift which makes it harder for people to criticize the actions of big companies is probably not great. But why does the personification of these companies as cool people in your life specifically suck? Well, for one thing, we already know that this kind of advertising allows consumers to create distinct personalities for these companies. And we know that this means they're viewed less as massive, powerful entities composed of thousands of people and more one sole sentient individual. And of course, on a rational level, everybody knows that this isn't true. Nobody is going to see a picture of smug anime Wendy and think, wow, this is a real person. But on a subconscious level, this might trick you into thinking that these companies are your friends. It's not a bunch of underpaid interns are funny on social media, it's the entire company is funny on social media. The worst part is, the more immune you think you are to this kind of advertising, the more susceptible you become as a result. This is a well-observed phenomenon called the third person effect. Essentially, thinking you're immune to subconscious advertisement and brainwashing causes you to let your guard down, making you even more susceptible to it. People think, well, I'm smart, I wouldn't fall for that. But the truth is, being manipulated, whether it be by cults, politicians, or advertisements, has nothing to do with how intelligent you are. The reason they use these manipulative tactics is because they're effective, which means that often, even if people consciously know something, what's more important when evaluating their worldview is how it makes them feel. For instance, if you asked most people if they cared in principle if their food was made ethically, they would probably say yes. And if you asked those same people if they thought their quirky friend Wendy's made their food ethically, they'd probably be like, nah, probably not. And they'd be right that fun, relatable anime girl sources her vegetables from farms in Mexico that effectively use slave labor. Responding to people on Twitter who accuse you of using frozen beef is pretty low-hanging fruit, but I doubt there are going to be any fun zingers about workers being slapped for asking for more food or tied to a tree and beaten for trying to leave the farm. This doesn't fit into the fun, quirky narrative about a cute anime girl giving you a burger while roasting haters. And even though a lot of people probably do consciously know these things, the way this advertising works is that most people don't really care. Worse, when you think of a megacorporation as a person, that includes imagining them with thoughts, feelings, and desires. So not only are people who criticize these companies' unethical practices being lame and unfun and uncool, they're also hurting this delicate waifu's feelings. No, seriously. Multiple average people on Twitter and actual news sources have referred to people criticizing the company on social media as bullying. And this is what happens when you personify a company. It's a lot harder to say Wendy's is the worst when instead of talking about CEOs in ginormous mansions, you're talking about the fun friend that tweets at you. Not only that, but this new form of advertising largely takes place over social media where people regularly go to unwind. And this represents a cultural shift of subtle advertising becoming increasingly pervasive in people's day-to-day lives. In the past, when you sat down and watched TV, there would be a clear delineation between entertainment and advertising. You watch the show to enjoy yourself, and every 15 minutes or so you get some commercials which explicitly tell you that they are commercials. There's no subtle subconscious ingraining going on there. As product placement started to become more and more common, this line started to blur a little bit. More and more, ads started to not look like ads. And with this new level of social media usage, where ads are often functionally indistinguishable from fun content that you would still share with your friends otherwise, this is kind of terrifying. The subtlety of it all means that often people don't even realize how frequently they're thinking of these companies and thinking of them in a positive way. More and more, this is starting to mean that A, ads are everywhere in your life, and B, you barely even register them as ads. For us, this means that we are becoming less and less able to get away from advertising and less able to notice it, which means that when we go to Wendy's or Denny's or Arby's and go get a hamburger, this choice becomes less and less of a free, conscious one. And if this is the direction that ads are going to take from here on out, imagine how that's going to affect people who never grew up knowing anything else. I'm in an awkward spot generationally where if you ask some people, half of them are going to say I'm a millennial and half of them say I'm part of Generation Z. Now, I don't really care because generations are made up anyway, but I have started to notice that people even 5 years younger than me have a different outlook on social media than I do. Most people I know started to get Facebook when they were 13-ish, whereas kids nowadays are on apps like Snapchat or Instagram as young as 8 or 9. They literally don't know any differently. And yes, of course, parents should take responsibility to make sure this isn't happening, but either way, these kids are going to grow up in a world where this kind of coercive advertising and brand consciousness is ever present. And because they never grew up without it, they are going to be even less equipped than we are to notice and point out these advertising tactics, and that is a serious problem. Advertising via social media has gotten even more refined, precise, and subtle since the generation that grew up knowing how to master social media is starting to get jobs in marketing. This has allowed us to conceptualize massive corporations as sentient individuals, making it harder to notice and criticize advertising practices in our day-to-day lives. People have completely fallen in love with individuals that don't exist, from spending real money on them for nothing in return to begging the companies to make fun of them. And as funny as it is to watch a supposedly professional company like McDonald's suddenly roast the shit out of someone on Twitter, this is starting to have real ramifications. As this form of advertising starts to increasingly pervade every aspect of our day-to-day lives, criticizing the actions of these companies becomes even more difficult. And if this sucks for us already, it's really going to suck for the people who grew up immersed in it. I can't force anyone to unfollow these companies on Twitter and install an ad blocker, but if you're going to enjoy a delicious, never-frozen hamburger at cutting-edge prices, please just make sure you're conscious of where that choice may have come from. Or just join the revolution and start smashing shit, whatever makes you happy.